When you imagine a bank robbery, the image is almost always the same. Masks, heavy weaponry, a crew shouting orders, and bags being filled with millions of dollars in just a few minutes. It's chaos, adrenaline, and a high-speed getaway. But one June morning in North Carolina, something happened that completely broke this pattern. A man walked into a bank not to get rich, but to lose his freedom. He didn't wear a mask. He didn't run. He didn't scream. James Verone, a 59-year-old man with the appearance of a harmless grandfather, walked up to the teller and demanded an amount that made the employee's brain freeze for a few seconds. He wanted exactly $1. And the reason why he risked decades of his life for an amount that wouldn't even buy a piece of candy is without a doubt one of the saddest and most bizarre stories about the failures of our modern society. The day that made nitrogen monoxide sense, it was June 9, 2011, a standard Thursday in Gastonia. James left his house, but he knew he wouldn't be coming back. He took a shower, put on a clean shirt, and took a cab to the RBC bank branch. Upon entering, no one noticed anything wrong. He didn't have the nervous energy of a criminal about to commit a serious felony. He walked with difficulty, limping slightly, but with cold determination. Arriving at the window, he handed a note to the teller. The employee, trained to identify threats, read the handwritten words and felt a chill, but soon after, absolute confusion. The note said, "This is a bank robbery. Please only give me $1. James looked her in the eye and said calmly, "I'll be sitting in the chair, right there waiting for the police." The teller, shaking and not knowing if this was a bad joke or a psychological trap, handed over the dollar. But what James did next was even more unbelievable. The getaway that never happened. Anyone in trouble with the law knows that the first few minutes after the crime are crucial for the escape. But James took his $1 bill, turned his back to the exit, and walked slowly to the soft sofa in the bank lobby. He sat down, crossed his legs, and simply waited. By this point, the manager had already triggered the silent alarm and called 911. Employees watched that gentleman sitting comfortably, as if he were waiting to be served to open a savings account. In a moment of surreal tension, James even chatted with one of the security guards, reinforcing that he had no intention of hurting anyone, but that he wouldn't leave without handcuffs. He looked at his watch, impatient, not because he was afraid of getting caught, but because the police were taking too long to arrive. And he was in a hurry to get arrested. Confused police, calm criminal. When the sirens finally echoed and officers entered the branch with guns drawn, ready for a confrontation, they found James Verone sitting down. He stood up slowly, put his hands behind his back, and practically offered himself up to be taken. During the search, the officers were baffled. He had no gun. He had no knife. He had no getaway car waiting around the corner. The only thing they found in his pocket was that single stolen dollar. At the station, detectives tried to put the puzzle together. They thought James might be out of his mind, under the influence of substances, or suffering from some mental delusion. But tests showed he was sober and lucid. He answered every question with clarity and politeness. When asked why he did it, James dropped the bombshell that turned this case from a funny police news blurb into a social tragedy. I'm a sick man, and jail is the only place where I can get treated. Who was the man on the sofa? To understand how someone reaches this point, we need to go back a bit. James wasn't a bum or a career criminal. On the contrary, he spent his entire life following the rules. For 17 years, he worked faithfully as a Coca-Cola delivery driver, waking up early, paying his bills, and living an honest life. He was the kind of neighbor no one would suspect would one day become a police headline. He always believed in the system. Work hard and you will have a dignified life. But life has a cruel way of laughing at our plans. At 59, James's American dream had turned into a nightmare. He was a proud man who never asked for handouts, but he was about to discover that honesty doesn't pay medical expenses. When the body fails and the pocket empties, the downward spiral began when James lost his job. The economy was tough, and at his age, re-entering the market is almost impossible. He picked up odd jobs as a truck driver and convenience store clerk, but his body began to charge the price for decades of heavy labor. He suffered from terrible back pain, had a serious foot problem that made him limp, and most frightening of all, he noticed a strange protrusion on his chest. Without a steady job, he lost his health insurance. His savings dried up, quickly paying for rent and food. He found himself at a dead end. He was too sick to work and too poor to get treatment. He applied for Social Security, but was informed he would only be eligible for benefits at age 62. That was 3 years away. James knew that, with that lump in his chest and the constant pain, he might check out before seeing a penny from the government. Silent desperation took over. The logic of desperation, that's when James's mind formulated the plan. He didn't act on impulse, it was pure math. He calculated that if he became a guest of the state, the Constitution would guarantee him 3 things he didn't have out here: a roof over his head, 3 meals a day, and most importantly, free medical care. Prison wasn't a punishment for him. It was a retirement plan and a hospital. He sold everything of value, donated his furniture, and paid the last month of rent on his apartment so as not to leave debts for the landlord. He cleaned up his civil life to start his criminal life. On the day of the robbery, he was sure his plan was perfect. He was aiming for a conviction for bank robbery, which would give him about 3 years in federal prison, the exact time he needed to get treated and wait for retirement age to arrive. But the system still had one last irony in store for him. The system strikes back in court. James's honesty and kindness worked against him. Because he asked for only $1, didn't use a weapon, and was extremely polite to the teller, the prosecution had trouble charging him with bank robbery at the federal level. Instead, he was charged with larceny from a person, a lesser crime. James was devastated. He tried to argue with the judge, explaining that he wanted the maximum sentence. He needed those years in the shade. The result was bittersweet. James managed to get arrested and consequently received treatment for his pain and exams for his chest, but the sentence was much shorter than the 3 years he had planned. The system didn't know how to deal with someone who hacked the logic of punishment. He was sent to the county jail, where medical treatment is basic, rather than the federal penitentiary, where he would have had access to better care. The price of dignity. James Verone's story went viral worldwide, but not how he expected. He became the face of a silent crisis. After serving his reduced sentence, he was released, returning to the same insecurity he tried to flee. Eventually, with the visibility of the case, he managed to access Social Security early due to disability, but the cost was his clean record and his temporary freedom. The case of the $1 robber leaves us with an uncomfortable question that echoes to this day. What kind of society have we built where freedom becomes more dangerous to a man's survival than a prison cell? James Verone had to become a villain in the eyes of the law just to try to stay alive. And if that isn't the real crime of this story, I don't know what is.